Ken Wilber, as people know, just released a new book, Finding Radical Wholeness, where basically what he's doing is he is presenting wholeness in terms of these 5 different paths. And none of these paths can capture the same kind of wholeness as the other paths. So we've got the path of waking up, which produces one kind of wholeness, a path of growing up that produces another kind of wholeness, cleaning up, showing up, and opening up, which is around basically opening up to our multiple intelligence and all these different lines of intelligence. So this conversation that we're going to have today about defenses as a line of development, it's sort of a grand intersection between a lot of these different paths of wholeness.
Bruce Lipton, in the biology of transcendence, he was originally a cell biologist, right? So he said from the very beginning, from 2 billion years ago, prokaryote cells, they do 2 things. They're either growing or defending. And that's true from the evolutionary line, from them all the way up to us. And now with human beings, we have ridiculously complex defenses. And what defenses are our reflexive way of protecting ourselves when the world threatens. And we need them. They're very, very, very important. We generally go through life in one of 2 general kinds of states. One is states of healthy response to the present moment. We're socially engaged, we feel secure, and we're just responding to the moment. And our unconscious is collaborating with the people around us. We're socially engaged, feel collaborative, like you and I feel connected and collaborative and safe. The other place that we spend time is defensive states. When my nervous system reads threat, it's going to protect me. And it's going to start with my most primitive defenses. So I'm going to say that again because that's a big deal. When I feel threatened, my nervous system, my shadow self, my adaptive unconscious is going to protect me, and it will start with my most primitive defenses. Okay? Because that's how it works. In people, when you feel threatened, your nervous system instantiates a defensive state, 40 to 50 milliseconds. Almost instantaneously. If we're going to be aware of it, which we sometimes are, sometimes aren't, we'll find out about it a half second later or a second later. So we don't decide to have defensive states. We discover ourselves in defensive states or not. And those defensive states have characteristics. The first one is amplified or numbed emotion. Emotion is there to motivate us to act. So our nervous system is amplifying or numbing our emotions to prepare us to deal with the defense. We have a distorted perspective because every time there's a state, there's a story that's supporting that state, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that story needs to give us an explanation that's proportionate to our level of arousal, which generally is distorted in a defensive state. Because if I feel threatened, say by you, I have to create a story about, Corey being threatening, okay? We have destructive impulses for fight or flight. These are the primitive defenses, which work really well in the ancestral tribes. Fight or flight, normalized social relationships, kept people getting away from people who were threatening or dominating someone who was giving them a hard time. And, we have lots of dominance, submission instincts, and so on, all of us. But they're destructive impulses in the present era because there are much more sophisticated defenses and responses that we can do. For instance, I can regulate my defensive state and go into social engagement with you, and we can come up with a mutually satisfying understanding that makes us more self-aware and more effective. Okay? So once you learn how to do that, you don't want to go to fight, flight hardly ever. Okay.
So you're saying the complexity and the subtlety of these defense mechanisms really increase as we grow through these stages of development. Because what you're describing right now is really, gross body defenses. For example, fight or flight is like, I'm going to move my body,
That's right.
in the following ways in order to defend myself from this perceived threat. And then that becomes increasingly, again, more subtle, more complex as we continue through the later stages.
Absolutely. As we develop inner structures, every time there's another level of development, there's another capacity for pathology. That pathology is enacted through defensive states.
Again, we're never at any of these stages. Development is not monolithic. It's not linear. It is sequential, but it's not linear. And I think that all of us have a tremendous amount of intrapersonal diversity within us, and we can show up in different contexts in different ways. And we also have a very long life history where various pieces of shadow and trauma, some bigger or smaller than others, can still remain active within us. However, at Turquoise, we have, as we said earlier, more tools at our disposal in order to recognize and reintegrate those shadows and traumas. I do think that if we have shadows that are just running wild in the basement of our psyche, yet chances are it's going to be more difficult to enter some of these later stages simply because we're being drawn and quartered from the inside out by all of these different competing motivations or traumas or frictions or what have you. I can say from experience, literally every single quote unquote turquoise person I know, or all the people I know who I recognize at Turquoise, maybe I'm projecting Turquoise onto them, I can own that, but every Turquoise person I know has shadow, has trauma, has coping mechanisms, has their own projections, their own introductions, and sometimes their own split off selves. However, Turquoise brings a renewed sort of imperative to identify, recognize, and reintegrate whatever shadows might be running around in our system.